This is episode 16, where we uncover the illusion of individual understanding and the hidden traps of power and groupthink in shaping our beliefs.
And it's a feeling many people share, right? Just being completely swamped by how complex everything seems globally.
Totally. Keeping up feels impossible sometimes.
Well, the source material we're looking at today actually says if you feel that way, you're, probably onto something.
Yeah, it suggests you're on the right track because honestly, no single person can grasp it all.
Right. So that's our task today, isn't it? To sort of unpack why it's so hard for one person to really get the big picture.
Exactly. And how much of what we think we know is really just, well, group knowledge.
And then there's this whole other layer.
Yeah.
Power. How power messes with our ability to find truth.
So we're pulling insights from a text that really gets into these tangled ideas, individual ignorance, group dynamics, power.
And the mission is to distill those core ideas, give you a clearer view.
Okay, so where do we start? The source jumps right in by challenging a pretty fundamental idea in, like, modern Western thought.
Yeah, this notion of the independent rational agent, it's kind of the bedrock for so much democracy, free markets.
The idea that the voter knows best, the customer's always right, education helps you think for yourself, all that.
This image of us as individuals logically weighing things up, making our own informed choices.
But this text really pushes back. It brings in critiques post-colonial feminist perspectives, suggesting maybe this rational individual is more of a chauvinistic Western fantasy.
Rooted in a specific viewpoint, not a universal truth.
And it's not just theory. There's evidence from behavioral economics, evolutionary psychology.
Right. They show we often decide based on gut feelings, heuristics, quick emotional responses.
Yeah.
Not always pure reason.
Our Stone Age brains trying to cope with a Silicon Age world. We're not really wired for it, are we?
Apparently not perfectly. And here's where it gets really interesting, kind of flips things around.
Go on.
The source argues it's not just individual rationality that's maybe overrated, but individuality itself. It says humans rarely think for themselves. We actually think in groups.
We think in groups.
Yeah. And this collective thinking, this shared brain power, that's presented as the real advantage Homo sapiens had. Our superpower wasn't individual genius, it was collaboration.
Okay, I can see that for big projects.
Yeah.
Building pyramids or, the internet. No one person knows all that.
Exactly. We depend completely on knowledge distributed across many minds.
And the text makes this almost humbling point that individually we know embarrassingly little.
Embarrassingly little. Maybe even less practical stuff than our Stone Age ancestors.
Who knew how to find food, make fire, build shelter? Things most of us rely on others for now.
Completely. Which brings us to this key concept, the source flags.
Yeah.
The knowledge illusion.
Okay, the knowledge illusion, what's that?
It's a term from Stephen Sloman and Philip Fernbach. It's this idea that we feel like we know a lot individually because we treat the knowledge in other people's heads in our group as if it were our own.
Okay. Like collective knowledge feels personal?
Precisely. The classic example they use, which the source mentions, is the zip.
The zipper.
Yeah. Ask someone if they understand how a zip works. Most people say, sure, of course, we use them constantly.
Right. Seems simple enough.
But then ask them to actually explain the mechanism step by step.
It can't. They can't.
Often no, they fumble. That gap between the feeling of understanding and the actual detailed individual knowledge, that's the knowledge illusion.
Okay, that makes sense. But the source says this isn't necessarily all bad, right? This reliance on the group.
No, not at all, evolutionarily speaking. It was hugely successful. It let us build complex societies, develop amazing tech.
Without each of us needing to be a master of everything, we outsource the knowing.
Exactly. It worked brilliantly, but, and here's the turn.
The downside. The double-edged sword you mentioned earlier.
Yeah. In today's super complex world, the source argues the big danger is that people fail to realize just how ignorant they are.
They have strong opinions, but maybe not much depth underneath.
That's the idea. The source gives examples. People pushing policies on, say, climate change or GMOs with very little grasp of the science.
Or holding passionate views on conflicts in places they couldn't find on a map.
And it gets worse because we often live in these echo chambers, right? Like-minded friends, news feeds that just confirm what we already think.
So our ignorance doesn't really get challenged. It just gets reinforced.
Which leads to maybe the most uncomfortable point in the text.
Okay.
It suggests that just throwing more facts at people, well, it's unlikely to improve matters.
Wait, really? More facts don't help. That seems wrong.
It feels counterintuitive, yeah.
Yeah.
But the argument is that our views aren't really shaped by individual rational analysis of facts.
They're shaped by...
By communal groupthink.
Well,
By loyalty to our group. Belonging matters more than being factually correct, often.
so hitting people with data can actually backfire.
It can. The source says people don't like too many facts, and they certainly don't like to feel stupid.
Ouch. Okay, so trying to convince, say, the example given Tea Party folks about global warming with stats.
Might not work because their position isn't necessarily about the data itself, but about identity, group loyalty.
Wow. Okay, the power of groupthink.
It's immense, and it can lead to beliefs that seem, well, almost random from the outside.
Like the example given about environmental issues in the U.S.
Exactly. How right-wing conservatives often seem less concerned about pollution or endangered species than left-wing progressives.
Which is kind of odd when you think about traditional conservative values, conservation, stewardship.
Right. You might almost expect the reverse. But once
Yeah.
a kind of party line gets set, maybe by chance or specific leaders,
It sticks. It becomes part of the group identity, overriding other values.
that's the argument. And this isn't just about the public. The source claims even scientists are not immune to the power of groupthink.
How so?
Well, the persistent belief among some scientists that just presenting facts should change minds, despite lots of evidence it often doesn't.
That belief itself might be a form of scientific groupthink.
Potentially, yeah. And taking it further, that initial idea of the rational individual.
But the one we started with.
Maybe that's a kind of liberal groupthink.
Huh. Okay, that connects to that brilliant Monty Python example the source uses.
Oh, the Life of Brian scene.
Yes. Where Brian tells the huge crowd, you're all individuals, you've got to think for yourselves.
And they all chant back in perfect unison, yes, we're all individuals, yes, we are all different.
It's such a perfect parody of, conforming to nonconformity.
And the text links it directly to modern life, chanting, the voter knows best, or the customer is always right. Same dynamic, maybe.
Believing in our independence, even as we follow the group script. Stark.
So, if ordinary folks are caught in this web of limited knowledge and groupthink, what about leaders? Presidents, CEOs?
Do they escape it? They have all those advisors, right?
This source argues, no, not necessarily. The problem besets not just ordinary voters and customers, but also presidents and CEOs.
But why? They have access to so much information. Experts.
True, but they face a different constraint. They're far too busy.
Too busy to find the truth.
Finding deep truth, especially truth that challenges the status quo, apparently takes a lot of time.
Okay.
And crucially, it requires the privilege of wasting time.
Wasting time. That sounds unproductive for a leader.
Maybe. But the idea is you need freedom to explore dead ends, chase hunches, let insights slowly emerge. If you're always under pressure for results, quick answers.
You will never find the truth. The deep truth, anyway.
And then there's this really core idea about power itself.
What's that?
That great power inevitably distorts the truth.
Distorted how?
Because power isn't really about seeing reality clearly. It's about changing reality.
Ah, okay. It's about action, not just observation.
Right. The analogy used is if you have a big hammer, everything looks like an invitation to metal. Power changes your perspective because it changes what you can do.
And what about the people around the powerful?
Right.
The advisors, the staff?
That's the other distortion. Everyone has agendas, conscious or not, ambitions, fears, things they want.
So the leader can never fully trust what they hear. The Sultan and his courtiers problem.
Exactly. The source describes great power as being like a black hole that warps the very space around it.
Whoa.
The closer you get, the more twisted things become. Words carry extra weight. People flatter or appease or just try to avoid saying the wrong thing.
So real, complex, potentially uncomfortable truths, they struggle to get through.
Yeah. People fall back on empty slogans or the greatest cliches because it's safer, simpler. Nuance gets lost in the gravitational pull.
The source mentions a specific story here.
Yeah, an anecdote about the author having dinner with Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu.
Expecting deep insights.
Right. But instead, finding a room full of people trying to impress, angling for favor, hearing nothing really profound.
And the author chalked it up not to the person, but to the power itself.
Exactly. To the inherent distortion caused by that gravitational pull of power. It just shapes the whole interaction.
That really illustrates the isolation, the warped reality at the center.
So if the center of power is this kind of truth-distorting zone, where do you find clearer insights?
Where does the source suggest looking?
It says you need to escape the black hole of power, and you need to allow yourself to waste a lot of time wandering here and there on the periphery.
On the periphery, out on the edges, why there?
Because, the argument goes, revolutionary knowledge rarely makes it to the center.
Why not?
The center is built on existing knowledge. The people there, the guardians of the old order, tend to filter out really unconventional, disruptive ideas.
Those challenging ideas are more likely to be found bubbling up on the margins.
That's the hypothesis.
Yep.
But, and this is really important, the source adds a huge caveat.
Okay.
The periphery isn't just full of hidden gems, it's also packed with an incredible amount of rubbish.
Ah, so like wild guesses, debunked theories, conspiracy stuff.
All of that. Uninformed guesses, debunked models, superstitious dogmas, and ridiculous conspiracy theories. That's why you need the time.
The time to sift through all the noise to maybe find a signal.
Exactly. You have to be willing to wade through nonsense to find the potentially valuable, unconventional insight.
So it's a real bind, isn't it, for leaders or really anyone trying to understand things?
A double bind, the text calls it. Stay in the center, you get distorted vision. Go to the margins, you risk wasting precious time on garbage.
And looking forward, the source warns this whole problem is just going to get worse.
Yeah. The world gets even more complex, which means individuals, pawns or kings, regular people or leaders will know even less relative to the whole picture.
Which brings us back, kind of full circle, to that ancient wisdom.
Socrates, over 2,000 years ago.
His conclusion. In the face of all this complexity and ignorance.
The best approach is simply to acknowledge our own individual ignorance.
Wow. That feels both wise and maybe a bit unsettling. The wisest thing is admitting we don't know much.
Especially as individuals, yeah. It's humbling.
Okay, so let's just quickly pull the main threads together from this deep dive.
Sure. First, our individual understanding. It's pretty limited. Both by the sheer complexity out there and by this knowledge illusion, we think we know more than we do because we lean on the group.
Right. And second, groupthink is incredibly powerful. It shapes our beliefs profoundly, often more than facts do.
Mm-hmm.
And it can lead to some surprisingly arbitrary group stances.
And third, power. It acts like that black hole, warping truth, especially at the center, making it hard for leaders to get a clear picture.
So we're facing an increasingly complex world where each of us understands less and less of the whole.
Which makes that Socratic point feel less like ancient philosophy and more like practical necessity, acknowledging our limits.
But, and this is the final kicker from the source, the really big question it leaves us with. If our understanding is so flawed, so shaped by illusion and group loyalty and power distortions, but what then about morality and justice?
Yeah. That's the heavy one.
If we cannot understand the world, how can we hope to tell the difference between right and wrong, justice and injustice?
How do we navigate ethics? How do we strive for justice if our very grasp of reality is built on such shaky ground?
That is definitely something to chew on. A real challenge for all of us, navigating this complex reality.